had died from what we call femicide now. And that's the killing of women simply to kill women and to grip control on a society, to spread fear and terror so that women are not allowed by their families to continue to walk in the streets to go to school or to go to their jobs. It controls a society, and 2 women a day die as a result of femicide in Guatemala right now. 2 women will die today. And Norma's foundation, Survivors Foundation, will probably be one of the best first responders because the police in Guatemala simply do not investigate. That is, they just show up and make sure the body is disposed of. They don't take the forensic evidence, essentially. It's getting better because Norma's putting so much pressure on. So, that being the case, I was taking testimony from survivors as well as women themselves, their families. And I had for years been told, you've got to meet Norma. Well, first off, you notice Norma gets called by her first name and people know who she is. That tells you something about her influence in the society when someone gets just simply called their first name and everybody knows who that is. Norma is probably, arguably, the most influential private citizen in the country. There probably is at least 1 or 2 other women who are also exceptionally influential. Rigoberta Menchú won a Nobel Peace Prize, for instance, and Rigoberta Menchú is also quite often just simply called Rigoberta. So I kept saying, no, I don't need to meet Norma. Norma's a busy woman. I will not meet Norma Cruz until I need to meet Norma because we're working on something. That means I may not ever meet her, and it's okay because she's busy, and I don't need to meet her as a celebrity, basically. Well, I did meet Norma because we took testimony basically from some of the people who work in her organization, including her whole team of lawyers who go to courts and accompany women and make sure things are done well, demanding justice. But I also met Norma's daughter, who is a survivor of violence, and took her testimony. But I still didn't meet Norma. But Norma started to put 2 and 2 together. Somehow we got in the same room to discuss the women who had experienced violence in the way of having their children stolen, abducted, kidnapped. And in that process, because that is now in my area, which is the forced fraud and coercion in the adoption practices in Guatemala, but also elsewhere, I said to Norma, what can I do for you? Oh boy. That was a moment, because I had no idea. In 2009, I'd be standing here, because this is my 3rd trip with Norma, with me making the introduction, and which has been an amazing thing, because Norma's so much fun, frankly. Somebody who deals with femicide is fun. That says something about who Norma is, because she can really keep it light while being very serious at times. But I've been with Norma, and I consider still this is accompaniment work. It's accompaniment work for somebody who is at a celebrity status, but this is the same work that Norma does for women who go to court. She accompanies, and she witnesses so that the judges know there's people there witnessing this. If you don't do this right, we're going to tell people, and we're going to take this to the press. And Norma says this regularly, I will take this to the press. I'll march into the Supreme Court. I will go to the president's office tomorrow. And she does. And they don't say no when Norma says, I need to talk to so-and-so at this point, which is wonderful. And part of that is because Norma has now won awards. She has access now, a Nobel Peace Prize nominee. Okay, she was not awarded that. We've already have one Guatemalan woman, and there is a certain amount of we can't be doing this twice probably. She has won a Women's of Courage Award from the Obama administration, meeting Hillary Clinton and Michelle Obama. She has gained access now. And for Norma, those awards are about access. And so being a part of this as a process is now she gains some access to this environment and has been meeting with some people here, even in The Hague, meeting with the Guatemalan people here, the ambassador, et cetera, are in our vicinity. I know, meeting with the other Guatemalans. So I'm going to turn this over to you because you're going to some degree, witness what she has to say about what happened in Guatemala, but also I asked her to talk a little bit about the surrogacy piece, too, to kind of pull these things together. So on that, I'm going to introduce you simply my friend and colleague, Norma.
Tengan todos muy buenos días, todos y todas.
If everyone, good morning.
Yo no me pongo acá porque si no ya no me miran.
I don't stand up here because you can't see me.
Sí. Bueno, yo quiero compartirles la mañana de hoy porque Guatemala sabe que yo estoy acá. Y me decían, por favor, no cuentes solo las cosas tristes de Guatemala, cuenta las cosas positivas de Guatemala. ¿Verdad?
I'm standing here this morning because my people have asked me to share with you not just the sad stories, but also the positive stories.
Y el día de hoy, pues yo quiero compartirles algunas reflexiones de la experiencia de mi país en los últimos 7, 8 años.
And today I would like to share the experiences of the people of Guatemala in the last 8 to 10 years.
Como país sobrevivimos a una realidad muy dura que hemos estado viviendo.
How we have survived the reality that is very hard, a reality that we have lived all this time.
Tanto las mujeres como el sector niñez en Guatemala.
Especially women and children in Guatemala.
Y es que no partamos y no olvidemos que Guatemala es un país latinoamericano con una gran carga machista, racista y clasista.
Let's not remember that we are a country in Latin America with a heavy environment, cultural environment of machism, racism, and classism.
Y esto es importante tenerlo presente porque eso tiene que ver mucho en cómo se ve a la mujer, cómo se ve a los niños.
And this is very important because it determines how women and children are viewed.
Porque si a la mujer se le ve como un objeto y no como un ser humano investido de derechos, podemos hacer de ella lo que querramos.
Because if we see women as an object and not a person who is invested with rights, then we can do with her anything we want.
Entonces vemos que Guatemala hoy encabeza el segundo lugar en el mundo de mayor violencia contra la mujer. 700 mujeres asesinadas al año por ser mujeres.
So we see that Guatemala is in the second place of the number of homicides, feminicides that have been committed, or homicides against women that have been committed, 700 of them yearly.
Y sumada a esa realidad, nos vimos envueltos en una dinámica de que a esas mujeres no solo se les arrancaba la vida, no solo se les arrancaba el ser dueñas de su cuerpo, sino que también se les arrancaban a sus hijos el derecho a ser madres.
So we experienced that women were not just, their life was not being taken away, but also that their children their children were taken away.
En dos momentos de la historia de Guatemala. Uno, durante la guerra, en donde murieron muchas mujeres en medio de la guerra, y luego durante los tiempos de paz. Hoy en mi país estamos en tiempos de paz, deberíamos de estar construyendo la paz.
So I will talk about what we learned since the war, where many women actually died, and the transition into the times of peace that we should actually be experiencing at this point.
Yo siempre digo que Guatemala y sus mujeres y las mujeres de mi país son personas heroicas, heroínas, porque sobrevivieron a 36 años de guerra, han sobrevivido a un sistema patriarcal y día a día tienen que enfrentar la sobrevivencia por el hecho de ser mujeres.
So in Guatemala, we have to honor women as heroines, as heroes in a way, to the 36 years old war that they lived, as well as the atrocities of the patriarchal system. It's a struggle that every day they face in a struggle for survival.
Entonces hemos querido ir haciendo el ejercicio de aprender de nuestra historia, de sacar enseñanzas de nuestra historia.
So we have done an exercise to actually learn from our history and to draw lessons from that history.
Entonces nosotras nos enfrentamos en el 2006 a la dinámica de la adopción irregular, no de uno de dos niños, sino que de cientos de niños, y eso empezó a llamar la atención de la sociedad guatemalteca.
So we started in 2006 when the irregular adoptions started, and we're not only the disappearance and the kidnapping in abduction of 1 to 2 children was taking place, but also of hundreds of children.
Yo tenía ya varios años de venir acompañando a familiares de mujeres asesinadas y me había encontrado con casos de mujeres que presentaban cesárea en sus cuerpos.
So I was accompanying families during that time who had been assassinated, but we were noticing also that some of them were actually have performed cesarean on their bodies.
Y con evidencia de que había evidencia de que habían estado entre los 7 y 8 meses de gestación.
With evidence that they have lived 7 to 8 months of gestation.
Pero no encontrábamos al bebé, no se miraba qué había pasado con el bebé.
But we were unable to locate where the child was.
Y las investigaciones nos llevaron a establecer, y después encontramos a una mujer que había sobrevivido, que le habían sacado a su bebé de 7 meses a través de una cesárea para venderla en adopción.
So then we found a woman who had been killed, and a cesarean had been performed on her when she was 7 months of pregnancy, and we learned that the child had been sold.
Nosotros dijimos, no sabíamos cómo llamarle a eso, no sabíamos. Nosotras empezaron a llegar mujeres a la fundación a decir, ayúnenos porque me arrebataron a mi niña cuando yo iba en la calle.
So we didn't know how to call that. All what we knew is that that women have been seized or detained by kidnappers, I guess, when she was walking in the street.
Y nosotras empezamos a decir, bueno, la fundación fue creada para acompañar a mujeres víctimas de violencia. Y empezamos a lo interno una reflexión a decir, ¿qué tipo de violencia es esta? ¿Cómo le podemos llamar a esta violencia?
So we begin to understand that the mission of the Survivors Foundation was actually to accompany these women, to accompany the process to accompany them while their rights have been violated. And so our mission was to work on violence against women, and that was the purpose of being created.
Entonces nosotros establecimos que efectivamente era otro tipo de violencia, no la violaban, no la golpeaban, no la mataban, pero le estaban quitando el derecho a ser madres, a ver crecer a sus hijos. Les estaban quitando el fruto de su vientre.
So we understand that this was no less than another form of violence against women, and because the women were not being killed necessarily, but they were taking away the right to be mothers.
Y entonces se nos juntaba el pasado con el presente. En Guatemala durante la guerra hubieron 45,000 desaparecidos. Y empezamos a ver que en esta nueva etapa de nuestra vida democrática estaba presente la desaparición. O sea, en el momento que robaban a la criatura, las familias, las mamás empezaban a buscar en todos lados a esa criatura.
So we understood that in a way we were linking the past with the present, because during the past we had 45,000 disappearing desaparecidos, and a new phase under supposedly some democracy involved the disappearance also of children, where families were looking for them.
Entonces empezamos nuevamente, poníamos cientos de habeas corpus, de recursos de exhibición personal para entrar a orfanatos, para entrar a casas cunas, entrar a buscar a esas criaturas. Eran cientos, pasábamos la noche buscando a esas criaturas.
So we submitted hundreds of habeas corpus, which is a legal recourse in Guatemala, to be able to access the orphanages and go with the families to look for those children.
Entonces empezamos a regresar la mirada y a decir cuándo empezó esto en Guatemala. Y detectamos que había empezado en el tiempo, en 1983 con el gobierno de Ríos Montt, cuando se dieron las masacres en las comunidades indígenas.
So we begin to understand that this situation actually had started in 1983 under Ríos Montt government, when people have been disappearing.
En donde efectivamente habían niños que sobrevivían a la matanza, que había que buscarle un hogar. Pero también se empezó a generar de que empezaron a ver que los niños valían dinero, dejaban buenos créditos. Y ya no solo se llevaban a los niños sobrevivientes de masacres, sino que empezaron a robar niños de otras comunidades.
So we understood that during those years and the massacres, there were survivors that were disappearing and children that were disappearing, but also not only the children that were involved in or were victims of those massacres, but also children began to be stolen for the purposes of money.
Desde esa época se empezó a hacer uso de despojar de su identidad a ese niño que se robaba. Se le despojaba de toda su identidad.
So those children that were stolen actually were, their identity was taken away.
Algo que a mí me impresionó mucho es ver cómo a las niñas indígenas les quitaban su traje, les cortaban su pelo. Para las mujeres indígenas, su pelo largo, su trenza es algo muy importante.
So that we found that to the indigenous, they were actually, the indigenous people, women, have been, their dresses were taken away and their hair cut. And this is the typical dresses in the hair, which has so much meaning in the indigenous culture.
Se les quitaba su nombre, dejaban de llamarse María y Sep, y pasaban a tener otros nombres.
Actually, these were the children, and then they used to call them other names, not María except, and then other names were attributed to them.
Y entonces ahí empezamos nosotras a investigar y descubrimos que existía la Convención de La Haya. y que la Convención de La Haya, en su esencia, en su espíritu, lo que quería era regular y hacer de forma ordenada y de forma embestida de los derechos humanos, buscarle un hogar a aquel niño que no lo tuviera.
So we learned that of the existence of the Hague Convention, which in essence was regulated in an orderly manner, the rights, the human rights of children. And so we begin to understand that that meant to actually provide a home to a child.
Una esencia muy noble, muy humana.
A very novel and human essence.
Pero la dejamos a un lado, la dejamos a un lado, nos olvidamos de esa esencia, de ese espíritu, y empezamos a buscar niños para las familias que no tenían. Al revés, le cambiamos el espíritu, ¿verdad?
So the essence, the spirit of the convention was actually to find homes for those children. But instead, what we were doing is to find children for families. So we were changing the spirit of the convention.
Se convirtió en una industria en donde ya habían catálogos hasta por internet y en donde a los niños que se robaban tenían que ser niños que estuvieran 100% sanos para poderlos poner en esos catálogos y la gente seleccionar al niño que quería comprar.
So we learned that actually this was becoming an industry where a catalog was created of those children and stolen. And in those children that were stolen were preferred to be healthy. So the families would go through that catalog and select the child that was most healthy.
En Guatemala, en base a un estudio oficial de gobierno, se pudo establecer que se le daba trabajo a más de 5,000 personas en mi país. Empezó a generar una fuente de trabajo.
And then we also learned that this industry started to produce jobs in the country. And it was a source of jobs that was employing 5,000 people at least.
Pero no era trabajo, era corrupción.
But it wasn't work, it was corruption.
Porque tú empiezas a comprar la conciencia del funcionario público y entonces el funcionario público empieza a tratar de encubrir lo que está pasando.
It is corruption because it changes the conscience of the public servants, and then they engage in corruptive activities, not what they are supposed to be doing.
Entonces el llamado que hace la Convención del Niño a los estados, de que el Estado debe ser garante de los derechos del niño, de protegerlo, deja de ser. Y el Estado se vuelve en su propio comerciante.
So there is the spirit of the Hague Convention on Intercountry Adoption, which is to protect children, is lost. And the state becomes then the one who sells, who enters into the commercial trade.
Entonces, por eso es que nosotros aprendimos y estamos tratando hoy, en esta nueva etapa, con una ley nacional de adopciones, con un ente central, de retomar el espíritu de la convención. En cualquier parte del mundo que se den las adopciones deben de estar regidas por el espíritu de la convención, darle un hogar a aquel niño que no lo tiene.
So that the adoption law, what it is in essence, it reflects the desire to retake the spirit of the Hague Convention, which is to provide a home to a child that doesn't have it.
Y a raíz de ese espíritu de la convención, generar leyes al interior de nuestros países que regulen, que prevengan, que sancionen cuando nos querramos ir por otro lado.
So that the spirit is for countries to actually, to signatories countries and ratifying, to adopt laws that will regulate, prevent, and prosecute those involved in trafficking. That's the spirit that we need to reclaim.
No perder de vista que tenemos que armonizar las diferentes convenciones de Naciones Unidas, porque en el tema de la adopción o de otras formas, como las nuevas formas que hoy se están dando de las madres subrogadas, entran a jugar un papel otros actores, no solo el niño.
So that our purpose is now to harmonize this convention with other conventions, including those of the UN, because we're facing new forms of exploitation in new forms of what is happening, and including the situation faced by the surrogate mothers.
Porque la convención del niño tiene que estar reflejada cuando le demos vida a una ley de adopciones o similar. Tiene que estar reflejada también la convención contra la erradicación de toda forma de violencia contra las mujeres. No podemos andar nosotros condenando la violencia física, psicológica, patrimonial y sexual contra las mujeres, pero al mismo tiempo estarlas violentando de otra forma. No podemos. Entonces debemos de armonizar todas esas convenciones.
Because we cannot be attending the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the new adoption laws and continue to be violating women. And so we need to be observant also on the convention related to violence against women, because we cannot do any harm really, or observe these other laws and continue to do harm to women.
Porque en el fondo, en la esencia, estamos también instrumentalizando el cuerpo de la mujer. Lo estamos haciendo, lo estamos viendo nada más en función de generar una vida para satisfacer en determinado momento las necesidades de otros. Pero tenemos que cuidar de no ver a la mujer únicamente como reproductora de vida, sino verla en su integridad.
Because in essence, what we're doing would be through this new type of industry is to instrumentalize the bodies of women only as generators of new life to satisfy the needs of others, not as complete human beings.
Tenemos que desarrollar la capacidad de diálogo a lo interno de nuestros países. ¿Qué está pasando? ¿Qué estamos haciendo? ¿Qué estamos haciendo bien, pero también qué estamos haciendo mal? ¿Y cómo podemos superar lo que esté mal?
So we have to be reflective about what we've done well, but also have to be reflective about what we have not done well.
Tenemos que escuchar los puntos de vista de todos.
We have to listen to the points of view of others and everyone.
Porque en el caso de Guatemala no fue decir no a las adopciones, sino que fue escuchar a todos y decir vamos a tener adopciones nacionales e internacionales, pero reguladas. Y vamos a darle un hogar a aquel niño que no tiene un hogar y vamos a privilegiar a los niños especiales. Les vamos a dar la prioridad. No fue decir no van a ver, no. Vamos a hacerlo, pero de una manera distinta, ¿verdad?
So in the case of intercountry adoptions and adoptions, it's not that we said no to adoptions, both national and intercountry, because the purpose was to provide a home to a child. We focus more on children with special needs, and so what we were doing actually is making things differently.
Entonces, hablemos, platiquemos y encontremos solución a eso, a cómo ponernos de acuerdo.
So that we needed to come together to talk and get in an agreement on what to do.
Otro elemento que nosotros aprendimos de estas experiencias es que tenemos que prevenir, no tenemos que actuar cuando ya el problema se nos fue de las manos.
So the focus should be on preventing and not being able to do anything when the problem has gone from our hands.
Y que las leyes, y por eso es importante estos espacios, porque uno conoce otras realidades, otras experiencias, y eso le permite a uno incluso prepararse para las cosas nuevas que puedan venir en el futuro.
So that's why it's important, this type of spaces of dialogue, because we're able to expose ourselves to new realities, to new experiences, and to begin to do things in a new way.
¿Verdad? Nosotros allá también, este año tuvimos el primer caso de una madre surrogada. Tuvimos el primer caso y no sabíamos cómo se llamaba ese fenómeno, no sabíamos. Hoy vine a aprenderlo acá, así que muchas gracias, porque hoy vine a aprender algo nuevo acá. Uh-huh.
So we had just a few weeks ago the first case of surrogacy, and we didn't really even know what to call it. So I really thank you for allowing me to understand how to call it.
Y eso va a generar una nueva discusión en mi país, ¿verdad? Porque allá más del 50% de la población es indígena, es de raíces mayas, ¿verdad? Y para los mayas, los pueblos indígenas, los niños son sumamente importantes, la maternidad es sumamente importante.
So this would allow us to engage in a new discussion in Guatemala, because as you know, there is a large indigenous people community, and because for the indigenous peoples, actually, maternity is very important.
Porque ese es otro aspecto que hay que tomar en cuenta, la visión, nosotros le llamamos la cosmovisión, que como pueblo podamos tener sobre ciertos temas, y uno de estos es precisamente la maternidad, es precisamente cómo concebimos el tema de la maternidad para no entrar en conflicto en nuestras comunidades.
So part of the cosmovision of people, and particularly indigenous people, is how they view maternity. And so we need to take into consideration that in order to be able to engage in these dialogues.
Entonces, les quiero compartir algunas imágenes porque miren, la historia de los pueblos la construimos las personas. Y yo les quiero decir que este angelito que se llama Angelis Rodríguez, junto con la lucha de su madre y la lucha de otras madres, cambiaron la realidad de mi país.
Because the history is made by person, we need to understand that. I like to share that in some particular cases, this little angel that you have there is Angelina. The struggle of her mother actually has changed history in Guatemala.
Fueron estos casos los que descubrieron la realidad que estaba dándose y permitieron desarticular esas estructuras que en determinado momento pasaron a ser estructuras de crimen organizado.
So these cases, in particular this one, help to understand what was the reality lived in Guatemala, because it opened up to the understanding and knowledge of the criminal networks that were operating in that country.
en base a estos casos se dio vida a la ley de adopciones, a la ley contra la trata de personas, se dio vida a un sistema de alerta temprana como la alerta Amber en Estados Unidos para la búsqueda inmediata de los niños cuando son robados.
Because cases such as this one actually gave birth to the new adoption law, to the law that is combating human trafficking, as well as the Alba Kenneth Alert, which is similar to the Amber Alert in the U.S.
Esta es la alerta Amber. Estos dos niños, él es Kenneth, ella es Alba. Ambos fueron asesinados en esa dinámica del robo de niños, Kenneth con fines de adopción y Alba con fines de explotación sexual.
So those are Kenneth and Alba, and they were disappeared actually. Kenneth with the purpose of intercountry adoption, and then Alba with the purpose of sexual exploitation. And they are the ones who gave birth to the idea of this law as well.
Si ustedes ven, ahí está el logotipo del gobierno de mi país.
As you can see there is the logo of the government of Guatemala.
Hoy mi gobierno busca a los niños que desaparecen en mi país.
Now my government actually searches for the children who disappeared in Guatemala.
Le devolvimos la responsabilidad a mi gobierno de velar por el bienestar de los niños en mi país.
So we returned the responsibility to the government to protect the children in Guatemala.
Ella es María Dolores Pret, una niña que fue robada durante la guerra en el 84. Ella hoy es ciudadana de Bélgica y 30 años después es la primera niña que llega a Guatemala y presenta la denuncia y dice quiero justicia porque me robaron cuando yo era niña.
So this is Maria Dolores Prat, a child that was stolen in 1984 during the Civil War. And she was sold into adoption in Belgium. She's now a citizen of that country. So this is the first that actually comes back to Guatemala and that was adopted externally, that comes to Guatemala denouncing that she was stolen. This is 30 years after.
Y aquí les quiero mostrar, si ustedes ven a Guatemala, está aquí en la puntita. Nosotros estamos a escasas horas de Estados que es uno de los principales demandantes del tema de los niños. Estamos a muy pocas horas. Estamos en el patio trasero, así decimos allá, somos el patio trasero de Estados Unidos.
As you can see in this map, we are, Karen actually pointed out, we are very close where the demand comes from. And so we are only hours away. We are in the backyard of where the demand is coming from.
Entonces, el primer caso de madres subrogadas se dio precisamente en la zona fronteriza con México.
So the first case of the surrogate mother was in the border of Guatemala with Mexico.
En donde no hay Estado, porque el Estado es más débil por la gran presencia de traficantes de personas y de narcotraficantes.
Where the state actually, the government is actually very weak because it is an area where there's a lot of human trafficking.
Entonces, de alguna manera, digamos, este primer caso que se dio nos pone alertas de las nuevas modalidades que se puedan empezar a dar en mi país.
So this first case actually warned us of the new modalities that are taking place in our country.
Porque nosotros no lo vemos como una fuente de ingresos positiva, sino que la vemos como una fuente de ingresos que en esencia, que en el fondo lo que tiene es comercializar a un ser humano. Y esa parte nosotros sí no culturalmente no aceptamos, nos cuesta mucho aceptar la comercialización de un ser humano, ¿verdad?
Because in essence, this is not a new source of income for the country. In essence, this is a source of exploitation for human beings, which is contrary to our culture.
Entonces, un poco esto fue lo que nosotros aprendimos. Hoy tenemos una institucionalidad, tenemos un marco legal. Les quiero compartir que hoy ya no se pueden robar niños en Guatemala. En menos de 24 horas estamos localizando con éxito a los niños que son robados y poniendo en la cárcel a quienes se los robaron.
So this is what we have learned. Now in the country we don't have children that have been stolen without any search, and in 24 hours we're actually locating them and putting those who are responsible for the child being stolen in 24 hours and putting them in jail.
Y todos los que participaron, incluyendo funcionarios de gobierno en la comercialización de niños, están siendo puestos ante la justicia para responder por el delito que cometieron.
And everyone who is involved in that child being stolen, actually it's been prosecuted and put in jail.
Entonces les agradezco mucho. Esta es la experiencia de mi país. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much. This is the experience of my country.
Does someone have any questions? Can you?
Buenas, Norma, muchas gracias por su presentación. Tengo unas preguntas para clarificar un poco mi mente lo que usted ha contado. Es decir, todos los papeles de los niños que fueron al extranjero fueron falsos, me imagino. Entonces, había dicho en los papeles que fueron abandonados estos niños. Y también me pregunto, ¿qué pasa con los niños como María Dolores que han vuelto a Guatemala y han dicho que quiere justicia? ¿Qué pasa con eso?
Can you repeat it in English?
Yes, of course. I asked Norma what was on the papers of the children who go abroad, where I imagine they were false, and what was written on their papers if they were abandoned, and what happens with the children who go back to Guatemala, like Maria Dolores, the girl on the screen, and say that they want justice.
Efectivamente ha sido bien fuerte, porque al no ser verdadera la partida de nacimiento, o sea, la constancia de que tú naciste y tu padre y tu madre son fulanos de tal, todo eso se tuvo que anular. En el caso de Angeli es el primer caso en donde se anula la partida de nacimiento, se anula el pasaporte, se anula la escritura de adopción y se le devuelve su identidad. Ella fue adoptada con el nombre de Karen Abigail García, hoy es Karen Abigail Monahan, y su verdadero nombre era Angeli Rodríguez. El Estado guatemalteco, a través del sistema de justicia, le devuelve su identidad, anula la falsa identidad. Entonces la niña que hoy está en Estados Unidos legalmente no existe, nunca existió, y pues Estados Unidos tendrá que ver qué hace con eso, ¿verdad? Pero les estamos devolviendo su identidad a esas criaturas que fueron despojadas de ella. Y así como Dolores, la semana pasada
So for the first time, then we proceed with the false birth certificate and false birth certificates. We proceed with the nullification of those birth certificates. And in the case of Angeli, for example, what happened is that we were able to nullify actually the birth certificate, the passport, the adoption is a certificate as well, as a way of reclaiming their identity. And she was Karen Abigail Garcia, and then later adopted and changed the name to Karen Abigail Monahan, but her birth name is Angeli Rodriguez. And so in a way, by doing this, the girl is able to reclaim her identity. At this point, then, she is a non-existent child in the U.S., and the U.S. will have to figure out what to do with that.
En el caso de María Dolores, en la semana pasada fue detenida la mujer que la robó hace 28 años. Fue detenida la mujer, hoy está guardando prisión y va a ser puesta ante la justicia por el delito de plagio y secuestro, porque el delito de trata de persona no existía en esa época. Entonces le esperan 50 años de prisión de acuerdo a la legislación de mi país.
So in the case of Maria Dolores, the women, just about a week ago, the women who stole her actually was detained. And this is the woman who stole her 28 years ago. And so she's fixing jail, and the charges, because at the time that this happened, actually, the human trafficking law didn't exist. Then we use we call on the law of a kidnapping and fraud, which she will get a sentence of about 50 years.
Okay, can I ask you a question? Buenos dias, Norma. A very different kind of question. Some of our group have expressed concerns, or two concerns regarding international standards. Te dejo. Okay. And their application, and I wonder if you could give your advice, if you like, or opinion in light of Guatemala's experience in the last 10 to 15 years. Some people feel that the Hague Convention has institutionalized intercountry adoption in an unwarranted manner, in other words, an unjustified manner, and that it has set intercountry adoption in stone as an approved practice. Do you feel that the Hague Convention has had that negative effect, or do you think it has been a generally positive instrument in terms of Guatemala's experience? That's the first one. And the second one is that some people feel that the Hague Convention does not give sufficient importance to the role and opinion and support for first families of children. They feel that it overlooks the rights of first families. Given the wider international standards, or the wider context of international standards in which the Hague Convention deals with intercountry adoption as such, do you feel that there is an argument in favor of modifying in some way the Hague Convention to give more importance to birth families or first families? Thanks.
Bueno, yo quiero decirles que la convención sí es positiva y sí regula, pero no se debe de alejar uno del. Yo insisto mucho en el espíritu de la convención, porque toda ley tiene un alma, y si tú te apartas de eso, se puede dar cualquier cosa. Yo sí diría, yo siempre digo que este tipo de instrumentos no está escrito sobre piedra, y que hay que irlos renovando y actualizando a las nuevas realidades que se van presentando, porque la realidad no es estática, va cambiando. Y yo creo que ahorita, con el tiempo transcurrido de estar en vigencia la convención, ya es momento de evaluar, de fortalecer lo que esté bien y de integrar aquellos elementos que quedaron fuera y que de alguna manera la experiencia nos dice que tiene que estar dentro de la convención, como el tema el problema que tenemos de los niños robados.
Okay.
Solo para ti.
So overall, the convention has been very positive because it regulates the intercountry adoptions, which is a necessary measure. But we have to emphasize the spirit of the law, because every law has a soul, and it has to be seen as an instrument, not set in stone, but because there are new realities, those instruments need to be renewed because the realities are changing. And so we need to look at or assess what the Hague Convention has done into strengthening the parts that have done very well, and then to change others, because we need to go back to the spirit and to address issues as, for example, the children stolen.
Fíjense que debería de ser regulada para evitar que se vaya de las manos, porque si eso se va de las manos, porque eso, o sea, lo que pasa que son realidades que empiezan a generar ingresos en países muy pobres, y por supuesto que a la mujer le queda algo, pero la mayor riqueza queda en la estructura intermediaria. Entonces se crean estructuras, sin querer se crean estructuras que vienen del país que demanda al país, digamos, que está respondiendo a la demanda, y por supuesto que se empiezan a crear incluso empresas que tienen ramificaciones. Entonces, de alguna manera, digamos, hay quienes empiezan a lucrar más porque el ingreso es mayor para ellos por el lugar que ocupan en la cadena, y lo que hemos aprendido nosotros es que la mamá, la mujer, es la que menos beneficios percibe al final. Entonces se va generando una dinámica que, si no se controla, puede parar, digamos, siendo, digamos, una dinámica ilegal, a empezar a actuar al margen de la ley. Entonces hay que regularla, desde que empieza hay que regularla para garantizar los derechos de las mujeres, garantizar el derecho del niño, y garantizar también el derecho de los padres que han servido, digamos, de quienes han solicitado, digamos, la fecundidad. Uh-huh.
Yes, it has to be regulated because it can get out of hands. The reality is that this kind of activities actually generates an income in poor countries. But there is a whole chain of intermediaries and a structure that is formed all the way from the country that demands to the way that in the country that is supplied. And so mothers in this chain are the ones that actually less benefit from all of these transactions. And so if it's not controlled, then it will become legal. So we need to regulate it to be able to defend the rights of women, the children, and in those who commission.
Sí. Hoy en mi país es un delito. En el marco de la ley que hoy tenemos es un delito. O sea, porque creamos un marco legal como en el pasado, habían mujeres que se hacían pasar por madres biológicas, entonces allá se tipificó la suposición de parto. ¿Qué es la suposición de parto? Es simular o mentir y decir, bueno, yo tuve un parto, yo di a luz a una criatura, yo tengo un hijo que di a luz. Entonces, eso en mi país es un delito. Entonces, hoy con el marco legal que hay, no se puede dar esta figura, y si se da, van a haber muchas personas que vayan a prisión. Entonces,
because today in my country, surrogacy is a crime. And in Guatemala, we have one regulation, eso es con la ley with the human trafficking law, there is one specific prohibition that leads to crime, and it's what is called a pretended pregnancy. So if somebody pretends that he has been pregnant of a child that doesn't exist, and then that impinges actually as a form of crime. So the legal framework actually allows for this kind of things to be criminalized.
Sí. También está tipificado como el delito que una madre venda a un hijo. O sea, eso se tipificó como delito porque también, así como habían mujeres que les robaban a su niño, habían mujeres que estaban dando a luz para vender a niños. Entonces eso se tipificó como un delito, y hoy una mujer que vende a un niño va a parar a la cárcel.
Because this kind of act, actually, if a woman sells a child, it's identified as a crime, and she can go to jail.
Ahora, como siempre, digamos, las leyes están ahí, pero siempre se busca cómo burlar a las leyes. Yo les quiero compartir que hoy en mi país se reporta un promedio de 4,000 menores de edad robados al año. El 85% de los niños son rescatados. Pero, o sea, es una práctica, digamos, que siguen probando, viendo cómo le pueden hacer para burlar la ley que hoy tenemos, ¿verdad? Hemos aprendido que el tema busca abre como muchas puertas. Entonces, como sociedad tenemos que estar atentos a que no se vuelva a dar esta situación en cualquier forma, ¿verdad?
The law is there, but people are always trying to find out how to evade it. We have, for example, about 4,000 children stolen a year, and 85% of them are rescued, because they're always looking for a way to evade the law. So what we have learned is that there is always new doors that are opening. As society, we have to find how to prevent this from happening.
Esto nos ha permitido entonces que al no haber dinero de por medio, la adopción sea realmente darle un hogar a aquel niño que no lo tiene. Entonces se volvió a recuperar esa parte noble de la institución de la adopción, porque no hay dinero de por medio.
So what we learn is that if money is in the middle, then when money is no longer in the middle, then the spirit of giving a home to a child prevails. And so we need to make sure that that doesn't happen here.
Sorry, if we can hold the questions for coffee, we need to end this session. We're already 10 minutes over. So, but thank you very much, Norma, and please come up and ask questions at the front. We do have in the atrium, we have coffee, and I just wanted to remind people that at 12:30, at the very start of lunch, if you can come down to the lobby, we'll do a picture together. Okay, so at 12:30, at the end of this session, we'll do a picture. You have an announcement, Marcy.
And I just want to remind folks in streams 5, 4, and 2, is that right? That we're meeting in the attic right after coffee now. Okay.
10:30. Thanks.
They were the ones that sent the police training email. So it was people that have